So welcome everyone, both here in the room and also people joining online for our discussion on the economic dynamics in the former Soviet Union countries. I'm very pleased to chair this discussion. My name is Zsolt Darvos. I'm a senior fellow here at Bruegel, and I have a very distinguished colleagues giving some presentations and comments. Marek Dabrowski, who is also a non-resident fellow at Bruegel and also associated with CASE. Then Olga Popova, who is joining online, who is from the Leibniz Institute for East and Southeast European Studies. And we are really grateful to Matthew Busquet, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, who is the director at the European Commission. Now, so the event will be about a report that a large group of authors, including Marek and Olga, are preparing about former Soviet Union countries, focusing on Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Russia, and Ukraine. And they cover a number of issues, including the macroeconomic performance, financial stability, trade, investment, energy, but also political and geopolitical issues. And certainly since these countries have been very strongly affected by recent developments and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, then we also hope to learn about what are the implications of the war for the future of these countries. So with this introduction, let me first ask Marek to try to give an overview, no more than 15 minutes, ideally a bit less. And then Olga will offer some remarks on the energy sector. And we very much hope that Mr. Busquet will give us some useful inputs and comments. So Marek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. May I ask to launch my presentation? Thank you. Let me start from just a few information about the project and presentation. I am non-resident fellow in Bruegel, but here I am. My presentation is another capacity as fellow in the CASE Center for Social and Economic Research in Warsaw, international think tank based in Warsaw, which is about to conduct a project funded by Open Society Foundation on increasing economic resilience of Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova. The first stage of this project was completed a few months ago, and 3 country reports are available on CASE website. Welcome to everybody interested in this. What I present now, this is still draft of the final product, regional reports, which covers 7 countries, which already, Eastern European countries, which already were mentioned by Zsolt. Let me start from macroeconomic situation. This region was exposed to several shocks in the last 15 years or more. Global financial crisis 2008-9, decline in commodity prices 2014-16, then COVID, global inflation, and finally war in Ukraine. Regarding this last tragic event, we can distinguish 3 groups of countries: losers, evidently Ukraine as the aggression victim, Russia and Belarus, aggressor and country who helped in aggression, which were subject to sanction. Russia also had to divert a substantial part of this public spending to war, to financing war, and all this provoked capital outflow. And Moldova was also negatively affected, even before the war started, by the energy shock, termination of his contract with Gazprom, and then, of course, close neighborhood to conflict area act as a negative risk factor. So these are 4 countries which evidently were loser, each for different reasons. There are 2 countries which we identify as sort of temporary winners. There are Armenia and Georgia. They have benefited from trade redirection. Part of this is probably sanction circumvention, but it is not subject of our report, of our study to look in this legal dimension, which is, I would say, legal from the point of view of international sanction, was is illegal. We just notice macroeconomic effects, substantial trade redirection, re-export in the case of both countries. Then inflow of capital, people and businesses from Russia, which boosted economic growth, improved balance of payment, improved government finances, at least for 2022 and 2023, but this effect is gradually disappearing. It's typical one-off effect. And Azerbaijan is largely neutral to these developments. Looking ahead, the biggest negative factor, it's there are negative demographic trends in the entire region, to least extent in Azerbaijan, and dependent by large outward migration, seasonal, permanent, which on positive side gives a large inflow of remittances. I will come back then to this question. Here we see volatility of GDP, the biggest one obviously for Ukraine, but also all other countries. Practically each global and regional shock affected quite substantially this region. The effect was that practically there is either no convergence, income per capita convergence. We choose in this study Germany as the benchmark country, even given fact that recently Germany growth is also very low or close to zero. There is no progress on average in case of Russia, in case of Belarus. It's some in Azerbaijan, of course, is deconvergence in case of Ukraine for obvious reasons. Only 3 smallest economies, Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova, they converge gradually, but not in very fast pace, and from low starting level. Inflation still is the big issue in the region. Here there are cumulative inflation since beginning of 2007, so covering all these shocks which I mentioned before. And we see that the highest cumulative inflation was recorded in Belarus, followed by Ukraine, Russia, and Moldova. And practically only 2 countries, Armenia and Georgia, managed to keep the inflation at, I would say, reasonable level, 1-digit level annual, but in most cases also higher than in the rest of Europe. In fiscally, all practically countries record gradual increase in public debt to GDP. Of course, again, the biggest spike was recorded in Ukraine due to macroeconomic crisis of 2014-15 in the first stage of Russian aggression, and now again due to ongoing war. Other countries, there are periods of increase, like COVID, for example, then decrease, but on the trend line is everywhere increasing. So it can pose problems, especially for countries which approach levels of 50 or 60% of GDP, which is quite high level for countries which do not have solid macroeconomic ground and have limited access to international market. These risks are somewhat mitigated by ongoing IMF programs, which are and also EU macrofinancial assistance. This concerns 4 countries: Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Moldova. But nevertheless, there is one of the issues which must be addressed in these countries. Financial fragility. Here is the, I give only one picture. In the report is much more metrics. The highest level of non-performing loans was recorded in the last decade in Ukraine. This was the effect of the early 2000 banking crisis, especially of the largest bank, private bank, which had to be taken over by the Ukrainian government and then gradually clean up. Of course, war didn't also help in this process. Other countries formally record declining level of non-performing loans, but there are doubts in some cases, for example, Belarus, whether the methodology is correct and correctly applied. And also, for example, in case of Russia, where corporate loans expanded at least since 2023, in fact, to cover quasi-fiscal spending war-related, they may give increase of this NPL ratio over time. External economic relation trend. We see here 2 groups of countries. One which is increasing gradually its share of trade with Russia. This is the black part of bars. These are Belarus, these are Armenia, and Georgia. 3 other countries decrease this share. In Ukraine, and it's not present. Also, I am not completely sure that that is zero trade, but this is another story. So we see that there is a clear divergence here, that there are a group of countries which is increasingly engaged in trade with Russia, partly due to membership in Eurasian Economic Union, like Belarus and Armenia. Georgia is not member, is a country associated with the EU, has association agreement, but also as we see this increasingly engaged in trade with Russia. And here there are similar data, import data, very, very similar in terms of trends. Regarding foreign direct investment, there are stock of FDI, of incoming FDI to GDP. We see that Georgia is the leader, followed by Azerbaijan. But in all cases, the level of FDI stock is decreasing after 2020. So this indicates the increasing perception of geopolitical risk, deteriorating business climate, investment climate, and also inward-oriented economic policies in several cases. Remittances, they play a substantial role in the region, at least part of the region. Small countries, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, plus Ukraine, we see two tendencies. One is decline the share of remittances in GDP, in case of Moldova and in case of Armenia. Then we see increasing trend in Ukraine and Georgia, and slightly increasing trend recently also in Azerbaijan. Summing my presentation, main sources of vulnerabilities are related to geopolitical and security risk, ongoing war in Ukraine, and unresolved frozen conflicts, which affects almost each country in the region. Domestic political instability, actual or the potential, for example, Georgia, for example, history with referendum and parliamentary election in Moldova, deficiencies in governance and business climate, trade shocks, global and regional, and most probably forthcoming global shock coming from the new US administration will also indirectly affect the region. Energy dependence on Russia, and in case of Russia and Azerbaijan, dependence on the entire economy of hydrocarbon production and export. And finally, macroeconomic and financial fragility, which I already mentioned. Now, Olga will give a detailed picture on energy sector vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Marek, for this nice overview. Certainly, my number one. My question for the last session, the Q&A, would be why you think that Russia's economy was relatively strong despite the war and all the sanctions, but let's leave that question later. Now let me pass the floor to Olga Popova and ask you also to try to be brief in 5-8 minutes if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to present this part of the report. This is the presentation on the energy sector development that was the part of the report that Marek has just introduced. So what I will talk about is I will briefly outline some key features in the energy supply in the region that are important actually for understanding how the energy sector develops and what are dependencies there. And then we'll talk about the energy consumption, production, import, and we'll conclude with some current energy policies and the outlooks. So if we think about the region and its energy sector, there are a couple of key dependencies that we could outline. First, it's the fossil fuel dependence. As of 2022, but also traditionally starting from 90s, this region was highly dependent on the fossil fuels. In the picture here, I show the share of fossil fuels in the total energy supply, which refers to the domestic reproduced energy plus any imported energy minus exported and stored. And as you see here, for all countries in the region, this share of fossil fuels is higher than the OECD Europe's average. OECD Europe here refers to the European countries that are OECD members. So that includes not only European Union, but for example, Turkey, Norway, United Kingdom. And out of these fossil fuels, the natural gas is the primary source that is used as in the energy supply. On the top of that, what we can see from the structure of the economies, all of them are highly energy intensive and also carbon intensive. This is traditionally has been since the 90s. Over time, it's slightly reduced, both in terms of energy intensity and the carbon intensity, given restructuring of the economies. But overall, we don't see much changes, and it's still higher than in the Europe's case. Yes, the region, all countries in the region are dependent on the Russian energy sources, and not only on sources, but also more so in terms of the distribution channels and the value chains. That is also defines the developments in the region. This is the picture that shows the sources of energy supply. As you can see in yellow, in all countries, with the exception of Ukraine, the primary source of the total energy supply is the natural gas. Oil comes in the second place. And if you would draw the same picture for the 2021 or earlier periods, there are not much changes there. It's we do not yet observe any significant changes during the current events. But unfortunately, the international statistic is not yet available for the 2023 or 2024 to see how that developed most recently. In terms of the energy consumption, that has also been quite stable since 90s, although the Eastern Europe uses now less coal and crude oil, substituting them by the natural gas and the oil products. This picture on the left shows the sources of the energy consumption. Again, oil products and natural gas are highly used in all countries in the region. And the share of the renewable energy sources remains negligible. And this is, again, stable over time. The picture is for 2022, but we do not see much changes before that. And it's quite the same. In terms of the sectoral dynamics, the energy is primarily used by industry, transport, and the residential sector. Compared to 90s, it was the share of industry was decreasing. In terms of the most recent developments, comparing 2021 and 2022, we do not see much of the changes, with the exception probably being Ukraine, where transport sector in 2022 used less energy than it used to use in 2021. The picture is slightly more diversified if you look into the domestic energy production sources. So what are they actually produced by the countries themselves? And this is quite different between different countries of region. For Azerbaijan and Russia, this is quite similar in terms of the primary sources that are produced are the crude oil and the natural gas. But for other countries, we see much differences. Armenia, for example, Belarus and Ukraine use nuclear energy, quite some share of it. For Georgia, it is probably the country with the highest potential for the renewable energy sources. Also, hydro energy is used more there, and substantial part of the energy comes from the domestically from the hydro sources. But still, comparing this region to the European countries, we see that the low carbon energy production is still not that developed, and the countries still rely heavily on the fossil fuels. Also, all countries in the region, except for Azerbaijan and Ukraine, are net energy importers. So they are importing energy, and the share of import in the energy supply is between 40 to 50%, which is quite high for the sources of import. In terms of the specific importers, so to the region in terms of the energy, this is the picture showing the major importers in the region over time. And we see that, for example, Armenia and Belarus has traditionally been dependent highly on Russia, which is shown in blue. and this didn't change over time. Then for the Georgia, the share of dependency on the energy imports from Russia has been increasing over time. For Moldova, it is quite changing over time, but still we could outline that it is more like decreasing dependency on the Russian imports. And for Ukraine, it has been steadily decreasing and the substituting the energy sources by other countries, import from other countries. And finally, to outline some policies that are related to that, in principle, in the region, it is since especially 2019, when all countries in the region have already accepted or ratified the Paris Agreement. It was the period when there was a start in developing national action plans and strategies, and all countries in one or another way are already having some kind of action plans and strategies and enforce them, which are primarily focusing on the decarbonization and development of the renewable energy sources, which is also important from the point of view of strengthening the economic cooperation with the EU. And in general, the focus is on decarbonization, reducing dependency on the energy imports, enhancing energy security by reducing the demand for natural gas, diversification of energy supply sources, and improving energy efficiency. That would be it from my side. I look forward to questions and comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Olga, for this very nice overview of energy sector developments. What strikes me is this very high level of energy intensity and within that carbon intensity. Now, Mr. Busquet, so if you could help the authors with some comments on the report, or more generally, if you can describe what the DG enlargement and Eastern Neighborhood are trying to do to help these countries.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, to Marek and Olga for their presentation. We are a new DG, as you just said. Enlargement and Eastern Neighborhood, focusing on these countries, and now we can see there is clearly an overlap between Eastern Neighborhood and enlargement, as Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova are enlargement countries, but also members of the Eastern Neighborhood. That makes quite a change. This is a follow-up, to the war of aggression against Ukraine and the reaction of the EU. But I think it's important to have that in mind. If we look at what you are bringing, is both of you in your report and in your presentation, I think we need to look at the countries as very having lost a little bit their coherence, their regional coherence. We have countries which are looking to the Union. We have a country which is looking to the Union, but it's for the population, but the government has decided differently, Georgia. We have countries that stay in a strategic approach vis-à-vis their neighbors and vis-à-vis EU, Azerbaijan. And we have Belarus. We all know the situation in Belarus. And we have a country which is a little bit in between, Armenia, with a strong interest, to move to the east, but also strong dependencies with Russia. And this is extremely well highlighted by both your reports, the dependencies from Russia in terms of trade, in terms of energy, in terms of trade route. I think when we are looking at the Eastern Neighborhood, we really need to look at this dependency, because this is also bringing their political choices for the future quite at stake. The economic vulnerabilities that you presented, Marek, and the structural challenges, we could see the impact of COVID, we could see the impact of the war, and we could see the impact of Russia. So we can see also that when there is a political will, they can change. We can see that for Moldova, for example, with clearly redirection of their trade patterns. The high level of energy dependency, this is a structural issue, very low energy efficiency in the region. We've been investing substantially in renewable energy and energy efficiency in the region. Some of the countries are doing better than others, but still there is a very high level of, as you said, Olga, both energy intensity and carbon intensity in the region. And this is something, I mean, the countries will have to address. I mean, if they want to remain competitive in the global world. There are some structural opportunities. I think you're not mentioning that, but I think it's also important. I mean, of course, I mean, there is the rent in terms of some of the resources. Some of them are quite known. I mean, oil and gas, but also mineral, agricultural potential for Ukraine and Moldova, for example. But I would also add, I mean, the skills. And this is where when you look at the structure of the economy, I mean, the skills of the population, particularly in this part of the region, is quite important. The quality in terms of STEM, I mean, when we look at the PISA results, I mean, it has decreased, but in the whole world, it has decreased, I mean, the PISA results. So it's not specific, but globally, there is a strong capacity also in terms of STEM and engineering in the region. And openness, maybe entrepreneurship needs to be developed. But this is where also the services are being developed. And this is translated into the role of the SMEs in the economy. And this is something that we really want to push. I mean, you know that in the Union we have the SME Policy Act. This is something where we want to support more the development of small and medium enterprises. I mean, in the region, it's about 98% of the companies. It's about 60 to 80% of the labor force engaged in that. We still have a number of big companies or state-owned enterprises. Some reforms are taking place in some countries, but I mean, I think more needs to be done. But what we can see with these SMEs is that generally they are investing into low-value products or services. So the main challenge to me, but I'm happy to hear, I mean, your views, is how to get them integrated into higher value chains and regional value chains, particularly linked to Europe. So what it is that we can do, how can we build on these opportunities I was mentioning to get them more engaged into regional value chains and EU value chains? And for that, I think one of the elements is about digitalization. The investment in digital skills is something that needs to take place, which is progressively taking place. I think the public services in some countries have made enormous progress in terms of being more digital, providing services to citizens. So this is good, but it's very much an ecosystem that needs to be developed. It's good also in terms of efficiency. It's good for reducing the cost of corruption, which is important in many of our countries, the countries we are discussing today. So this is something which is important. The second element is, after the digitalization in terms of potential, is really investment. How to get more investment. And here we can see that some structural reforms have not yet fully taken place. I mean, for example, access to finance. We've developed a big number of programs in access to finance, including access to finance in local currency, working with the international financing institutions. This is something that is providing credit to SMEs, but again, we can see that it's for limited development and not yet for integration into EU value chains. 1/3 of the SMEs, according to a survey, I mean, maybe people have different figures according to the countries, but 1/3 of the SMEs in the Eastern Partnership region are credit constrained. So what is it that we can do, I mean, to help them develop and get into more job creation, but also more value added? The question also is about non-bank financing. We know structurally this is not developed enough. Some countries have been doing some efforts on microfinance, on leasing, on financial literacy. But then, I mean, of course, if you are talking about investment, when you are talking to investors, particularly EU investors, you need stability, you need security, you need predictability, and you need ease of doing business. So while on some of the aspects, some partner countries have done progress in terms of ease of doing business, I mean, the question of stability and security is, of course, more a global and a regional issue. So I think we could do more with our partner countries. I mean, the partner countries could do more also. I mean, it's of course a both sides direction. So we've developed our comprehensive approach, I mean, with 3 of these countries. Certainly with Ukraine, I mean, having our facility with our 3 pillars, 50 billion euros. I mean, this is big. I mean, just to recall that the EU is the first donor to Ukraine. I think it's important to recall it. I mean, these times where some figures are floating around which are not exactly the reality. 50 billion for us in terms of support to budget support to the government of Ukraine, to investment with a dedicated facility and with technical assistance and support, engaging also on the enlargement path. In Moldova, the trilogue just finished. We are proposing a facility of 1.9 billion euro, which for the size of the country is big for Moldova. It's about reforms and investment. And we have with Armenia our strategic partnership that the president signed last year in April. A little bit less money, but all grants 270 million euros, while for Ukraine and Moldova, it's partly grants, partly loans. So what we want to do with that is to help the country strengthening their regulatory environment, have and engage into structural reforms. For Ukraine and Moldova, certainly related also to the EU acquis, preparing them for joining the Union. But also having focused very much on investment and working with the private sector. So in my directorate, we've created a specific unit to work with the private sector, the EU private sector, to work with the private sector of the partner countries. We had a business forum in Moldova last year. In April, we are planning a new one. A lot of deals were done, 50 million euros, I mean, to Mahib to provide credit. We are having one next week with Ukraine. So, I mean, there is a lot of things that the Union can do and that we want to continue to be doing. But we want also a clear line of reform undertaken by the partner countries. This is a challenge we have, at least with one country, Georgia, which direction is not clear.
Thank you very much for first of all highlighting the large diversity between these countries, EU policies, and also those specific very important measures for SMEs, and the crucial role of obviously the reforms that countries themselves will have to do. Now, since we have 19 minutes left, let me open the floor for questions and comments. So if someone in the room would like to raise a question, then please raise your hand. And also let me encourage our online audience to go to Slido and type #Eastern Europe, and then you can ask questions. I already see one. But maybe let's start from the room if anyone has a question. Yes, my colleague Nina.
Well, thank you very much for a very nice and interesting presentation. My name is Nina Vujanovic, Bruegger Affiliate Fellow, and I just want to make a comment already raised on regional value chains and better integration of these countries into global value chains in general. There was a graph on FDI stock as a share of GDP. Now, foreign direct investment is a very obscure series because it contains various flows, real estate flow as well. And I'm just wondering whether foreign direct investment in manufacturing can actually speed up this process in addition to all the things that you mentioned, and what are the trends in FDI in manufacturing in these economies?
Thank you very much. Now, until people thinking, let me read a comment from the online question, which was about the source of FDI into the region. So what is the role of EU, Russia, and China, and what is the main infrastructure provider? Also, maybe other major projects, but it's already, in fact, quite some questions in 2 lines. And also, let me repeat my question, which I raised to Marek after his presentation, is that, I mean, the charts you indicated suggested that the Russian economy was rather resilient to the war, and I think has been outperforming lots of earlier projections. And what do you think why this is the case, and whether Russia would be able to withstand its economy, or there is a risk of a major deterioration? But is there any other question in the room? Yes.
Ivo Maas, Breugel. I had a question on the remittance, as there was this divergence in remittance between different countries. What is the reason for this? And does this also link with migration flows? And is this something which is permanent, this tendency, or is this temporary?
Thank you. The gentleman here.
Hello, everyone. Walikhan Bakhridinov from KU11, but I'm from Kazakhstan, so Kazakhstan is a sphere of my interest. But also, when I was coming here, I was thinking that Kazakhstan would also be a part of discussion. But since South Caucasus and Eastern Europe is a main priority today, I would like to specify my question: is to what extent current regionalization of post-Soviet world is appropriate nowadays? That's to all of you.
Thank you. And let me also ask a last question for Mr. Busquet. So obviously we know that the enlargement process is ongoing with Ukraine and Moldova, and you said that Georgia is moved away. My question is about other countries in Eastern Europe. So how do you see how they are navigating between Russia and the EU, and whether you see any scope for a greater role of their European orientation? So now let me ask our distinguished speaker to respond. Maybe we follow the same order, if you don't mind. So Marek, the floor is yours now.
Thank you for all comments and questions. I will try to answer them to extent which I can. Regarding Russia, why is doing relatively well, I would point to 4 factors. First, looking back in economic policy in Russia, since the very beginning of 2000s, one could guess that Russia prepared itself to the confrontation with the West. Of course, I cannot say how much various measures adopted, especially in macroeconomic policy field, were driven by this, I would say, consideration, or they were basically exemplification of some, I would say, conservative macroeconomic policy, especially fiscal policy approach, which definitely the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, represented from the very beginning of his first term. So basically Russia never overspent. In years of good conjuncture of high oil prices, it accumulated fiscal reserves, sovereign wealth funds, which were changed, restructured, renamed, but they exist until now. A National Welfare Fund is the current name. And also, definitely after 2014, there are several examples of various regulatory and legislation measures which, after the first wave of sanctions, which were intended to increase resilience of the Russian economy vis-à-vis potential further confrontation with the West. I mean creation of a Russian payment system which didn't exist before, payment cards, MIR, etc., making internet architecture more independent, etc. So this is one factor. Second, I would say this was professional macro management immediately after launching the biggest sanction package, especially financial sanction in March, early March 2022, like freezing the Russian international reserves, of cutting several Russian banks from SWIFT system, etc. And here definitely the credit should go to the Bank of Russia, Central Bank management. Third, I would say the flexibility of the Russian economy, which was not recognized before by many analysts and commentators. Even a few days ago, for different reasons, I went back to some discussion about Russia economy dated in 2020, 2021, where especially among political scientists was very often opinion, well, Russia economic system is equally sclerotic as was Soviet system. It's not true. Still, the Russia economy is, even with increasing state ownership and the degree of state government interference in the economy, the basic fabric is of the Russian economy is still market-oriented. It's quite substantial private sector, and exactly this sector helped to reorient trend, help to circumvent sanction, help adapt to the new circumstances, which I think it was not taken sufficiently into account before. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the sanction, economic sanction against Russia, they didn't have a global character. Approximately half of the countries representing half of the global GDP or even less joined this sanction. So in such circumstances, they didn't have a chance to work properly. And I think that this should be a big lesson for any potential confrontation with China. When I often read that we think about decoupling from China, about potential sanction, I think this is complete illusion. It's complete illusion. And such a big economy, as became partial illusion in case of Russia. But saying all this, I would say that I am not in the camp of those. I am not in the camp of those who claim that Russia economy already collapsed, and it's not the case. But also, I don't belong to the camp which claims there are also some analysts that nothing happened, that Russia can sustain this current war effort, at least in economic sphere. I think that there is clear evidence of mounting, even not formally fiscal, but quasi-fiscal tension, because this is the fact which is omitted by many and overlooked by many analysts, because yes, formally Russia has still low fiscal deficit, low public debt, even if one takes into consideration that it doesn't have access to international debt market. But what is expanding very rapidly, this is corporate credit in the environment of very high interest rate, but this is credit substantially subsidized by budget and provided by state-owned banks, and definitely substantial part of this credit is devoted to war effort, and this creates already overheating, several, I mean, for example, increasing inflation in the against high interest rate. So basically, this kind of practice, subsidizing interest rate for government favor project, it neutralizes effect of the high interest rate of central bank, discriminates other enterprises. And also, this may lead to serious problems in the financial sector, increasing non-performing loans in the near future. So basically, and also another sign is the decrease of liquid assets of national welfare funds, which now are at the level around 2% of GDP. So the level of financing this year deficit, fiscal deficit. So basically, one can risk the judgment that still is probably financial room for continued war in this calendar year, but as in I would say medium term, it will be increasingly difficult to continue it. Two other questions about chances of the region to join higher value added chains. I don't see such chances. I think that the only one country which is definitely not now in geopolitical position of close economic cooperation with Europe, I mean Russia, would be partly able to join such value chains. Perhaps Ukraine, but not definitely in the environment of ongoing war or even frozen conflict. I think that all other countries, they do not have economic and human capital potential and entrepreneurial potential to join this kind on mass scale. Of course, it may be cases of incidental cases of some very innovative enterprises, but definitely not, I think, in high-tech industry. Regionalization, your question, if I understood correctly this question, it's less and less a justification for considering this region as some, homogeneous entity. Of course, there is still rationale in this kind of analysis which we present you today, because there are neighboring countries and there are still quite strong dependencies, bilateral and multilateral in this region, even if several countries decouple from Russia in terms of trade, in terms of energy supply, but still there are some dependencies. But by economic and even more political characteristics, this region is not longer homogeneous. So even in terms of I would say, terminology, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we used CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, is not longer proper terminology, because basically practical terms, CIS is almost dead, and several countries.
Marek, can you
Yeah.
please conclude?
Okay, and so basically it's more and more heterogeneous region.
Thank you, and sorry. Now, Olga, some very quick responses, if you have.
Perhaps I could add a few remarks on the energy sector also. And well, I pretty much agree that in terms of the what we actually outline also in the report is that decarbonization and improving energy efficiency of production are the key priorities for the region in terms of the future development, which partially also done by creating the CBAM mechanism, and all the firms in the region are also forward-looking, and they would want to actually stay in the trade relations and improve the trade relations with the European Union. They already have incentives to decarbonize and to improve the energy efficiency of production. This could also be done with the investment, and not only the like the direct investment into the manufacturing, but also into improving the energy distribution infrastructure. And the institutions are, of course, very much important. And also, actually, we did some also prior research with Christopher Hartwell and Vladimir Otrashenko on the role of institutions, and specifically the product quality certification, and where we show that the improving the institutions would also be helpful for improving the energy efficiency. So this is indeed the part of one large mechanism that would help the region to improve in terms of the overall production and reducing energy intensity.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Busquet, please.
Yeah, 2 words. I mean, on investment. I mean, with the economic investment plan for Eastern Partnership and Global Gateway, I mean, in 3 years we've succeeded investing 17 billion euros in the Eastern Partnership region. I mean, leveraging 17 billion, using less than 3 billion euros by facilitating, I mean, with grants and guarantees. So there was one question, I think it was a written question about whether it's Global Gateway, the impact. I think it had significant impact in strategic investment. And to extend the question, I think the next challenge will be certainly, I mean, to improve connectivity between South Caucasus, Turkey as a middle corridor, going to Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, both in terms of connectivity by train, road, but also energy and digital. And this is what we are interested in, I mean, in developing these elements. Now, I think on your last questions, maybe for the other countries of mainly the Western Balkans, navigating between Russia and EU, I think it's quite interesting to see that sometimes you have a clear choice from the population, which is not always reflected by the elites. So this is something we need to work on. But I mean, there is some countries which are very much willing, and which are working on accelerating the integration. I mean, you know that Montenegro wants to become the 28th member of the Union in 2028, meaning finishing the negotiation very, very quickly. We just had the interim benchmarks last year report covering, I mean, where they are, and they want to accelerate that. Albania is also very interested to move forward. So there are certainly some countries in the Western Balkans that want to be to go quick and that are fully engaging into the accession process.
Thank you very much. I think this was a nice and optimistic closing word. I mean, I think many of us indeed hope that the accession process will continue. But I'm afraid we are over time now. So maybe if there are more questions, I think we still have opportunity to discuss in the cafeteria area. So my last role is just to thank to all three speakers for the excellent thoughts and remarks, and for all of you who were here and followed and asked questions, and also to our online audience. So thank you, and see you at other Bruegel events in the near future. Thank you and bye-bye.